Narendra, welcome again. Let's talk a bit about the imports of Russian crude into India, which does it have perhaps doesn't have as many options on the table as China does in its strategy. And talking about Russian oil, we have an article today as well which says the discount on that is dissipating a bit. Is that at all negative for India, or will it continue to buy oil no matter what?
Well, you see, India's refinery importing oil from Russia, it's basically an economic decision. It all depends on economics. As long as Russians are able to give attractive discounts and also make sure that, crude is shipped to Indian ports and they take care of logistics, including insurance and all that, in partnership, of course, with Indian importers, and still the price is attractive, the India refiners will go for that. I mean, it has nothing to do with politics or India's stand on Ukraine and all that, as some, columnists and writers they keep on and politicians keep on saying. Nothing to do with it. It's purely an economic, a decision based on economics. So far, the economics is attractive, and India's refiners are very happy to import, both the public sector, the government companies, and the private sector company. They're importing because the discounts are attractive. But at the same time, yes, we have seen reports, that Russia now is basically cutting on discount, in the sense that, that space is shrinking a bit. But it all depends on politics. It all depends on demand supply fundamentals globally. So my sense is, so far as of today, when we look at this, it is still working fine. In fact, now India is importing, if you look at India's import basket, roughly 28% crude is coming from Russia, and refiners seems to be fine, because we are also exporting products from India to all over the world, including the US and Western Europe, is Russian oil, which is coming to India, refined, and then exported to very same country which have imposed sanctions against Russian oil. The only difference is not crude, is petrol, diesel, turbine fuel, and and so on and so forth. So that's the change. But as I said, but at the same time, India's import from Iraq and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, the United States are also in place, because India follows a strategy to diversify supply sources. Even if Russia offers more discount, I don't think beyond a point Indian refiners are going to depend only on one source. Call it Russia, call it Saudi Arabia, call it Iraq, or call by any other name. So that's the strategy. But so far, Russian oil is attractive. We don't have pipelines and rail system and all that like China. We are kind of, it has to come by sea only. And so ships are important, insurance important, risk to ships important, and there's many other factors. But so far it has worked well, and Indian refiners are going ahead with it. What happens next week, tomorrow, we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, you mentioned that India will take oil at the right price, and and that it's not political, and yet you are as a country taking Russian crude when it's under embargo or sanctions from the West. India's relationships with the West are obviously very important, and India seeks the West support in its stance, sort of against China, if you like, in terms of regional power. Does the country have any qualms or doubts about how it can balance those two interests? We want the West to support us in our stance against Chinese hegemony, and yet we're going to do what we like and ignore what the rest of the world is doing. Today,
well,
2023.
I find the question funny, in the sense that, look, there are 1.40 billion people in India. That's more than the entire population of the so-called rich world, or the so-called global north, and Europe and America put together. And India is a sovereign country. I mean, you can impose sanctions against anyone, but you're not the United Nations. Sanctions have not been imposed by the United Nations. That's a decision of G7 and some Western countries. We respect that, but we have our own foreign policy. We have our own view of China. We have our own view of Russia. And the same way, we have our own view of OPEC. I mean, you are talking about OPEC and all that. That's not how we look at OPEC. We are a major importing country, the third largest consumer of oil in the world. We track OPEC very closely, probably more closely than Germany or Western Europe. We do that because OPEC, what happens in OPEC, within OPEC, and within OPEC plus, that's very important for us. So we look at the whole situation very differently. For us, it's very important that the Gulf, which is a major, area in terms of oil exporting countries, GCC countries, and even countries beyond GCC, political stability in that part of the world is very crucial for us. We have more than 10 million Indians living and working there. We have our economies are quite integrated. We are a huge exporter of services and manufacturing goods to the Gulf countries. We also import heavily from there. So if that means that they need oil, let's say for the sake of discussion, at $70 per barrel, but in return, they make sure that political stability is there, social stability, economic stability is there, and therefore Indians who live there can continue to grow, continue to prosper. That's not a bad economics. And at the same time, that it doesn't create any kind of political vacuum, which attracts countries like China into that region in different forms and shapes. So you see, oil, the way we look at it is oil is not just looking in front of the computer and looking at demand and supply graphs. Yes, that's an important component, demand supply, but it's more than that. That's how we view it. And for instance, Ukraine, I mean, you said about it, that was when Western countries took the decision to sanction Russian oil, did they consult India? They didn't. Then what they do with the sanctions and all that is, and how we look at Russian oil is none of their business. We are a sovereign country.
Yeah,
we are not. No, but just 1 minute. It's important to understand the world is no. Listen. Let me complete. World is not only the West. West is only 1.3 billion people. World is also 6.7 billion people. OPEC is not only how Europe looks at OPEC. OPEC is actually more than how we look at Europe. OPEC, how China look at OPEC, how China look at Russia, how India look at Russia, how Turkey look at Russia. That's more important. The problem is in Western part of the world, you people just don't forget about seeing. You don't acknowledge. You don't see. For you, you have your own world, and that's how you look at it. But the world has changed. You're not realizing the gravity center of energy is in Asia. It's not in the West. So wherever you are, it's important to keep that in mind.
Narendra, just before we wrap up, a couple of minutes, just to go to, we had an interesting article. Actually, I don't know if it's on the bulletin, but I was reading this article that the BRICS nations, which have their next meeting in June in South Africa, are inundated with new applicants to join the bloc, as you said. And so will we be, seeing the BRICS nations, which includes India, obviously welcoming that? And, in your opinion, how will that be received by the G7 economies? Neutral? Would they be bothered? Where do you see that going in terms of?
Well, good question. Good question. You see, I mean, these are not very kind of straight lines. India is very closely aligned with the West. We are very close to the United States. We are very close to NATO members. We are very close to Britain, close to European Union, Japan, Australia, and OECD countries, for the obvious reasons. So we are very, very closely aligned. We even have got an organization called the Quad, where India, Japan, Australia, and the United States are working together, and Chinese call it the Southern NATO, or etc. So on the one hand, you have this picture, but at the same time, it's important for India that we keep on asserting our sovereign strategic autonomy in terms of our relations with China, our relations with Russia, and also our relations with the BRICS countries. So therefore, BRICS become very important. And let's not forget, India is also hosting a SCO summit, which is an organization initiated first by Russia and China. Now India is a very important member of it, and we are hosting the summit. The Chinese president, Russian president, they will all be coming to Delhi for that summit. So, for us, the important thing is that, on the one hand, BRICS, more members are welcome. It doesn't really matter what G7 thinks about it, because we have very close ties with all the G7 countries at the same time. So unlike China or Russia, India is in a very different space. We are in a space where on the one hand, we have very, very close ties, almost brotherly ties with the Western countries. At the same time, we have historical close ties with Russia. With China, we want to have a good ties, but China has its own idea. We want to make sure Asia is multipolar. China wants a unipolar Asia. So we have this conflict. Plus, they have occupied some of our territory up in the mountains in the Himalayas. So there is a dispute and there are disagreements. There's a lot of heat between the two countries. And at the same time, India represents the entire global South practically. Countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the developing countries, India is their voice. If India is not the voice, which country? I mean, no other country has the kind of credibility to. So India speaks on behalf of all these countries, with G7, within G20, and also in other platforms. So SCO is expanding, and BRICS is expanding. We hope that G7 will answer. G7, I mean, India is the fifth largest economy in the world, but India is not a member of G7. It's funny in the sense that, we are actually much bigger economy than Britain or France. And in 4 years, India will be the third largest economy, overtaking Japan and Germany both. But G7, I mean, so that's a different kind of club. So, but as far as we are concerned, we want to be sure about we want to protect our, strategic autonomy. And we are an independent pole. We are not ally. We are not kind of, follower of any bloc. And we follow that. So West needs to understand, OPEC needs to understand that. And at the same time, China and Russia also need to understand it. India is a huge country, a big emerging power. And by 2050, India will be the second largest economy humankind has ever known. So please keep that in mind, and potential of India.